Hello, welcome to another episode of History Hack. Today is Renaissance Day. We've got with us Mary Hollingsworth, who is a historian and author specialising in the Renaissance. She has published many books on the subjects, including books like The Medici, The Cardinal's Hat, and The Conclave, 1559. But we're here to talk about her new book today, which is Princes of the Renaissance, which will be out very, very soon. Welcome, Mary.
Hi.
We are really looking. This is such an epic book. The size of this book is amazing. I'm amazed at how hard you've worked on your research for this book.
Well, it does. It's. I mean, a lot of it I've done. I mean, I suppose I've taught the Renaissance. I've studied it and I've taught it for so long that quite a lot of the stuff is just embedded in. I've just learnt it over the years. But it is a very complicated. It's just a very complicated period and lots of strange and lots of interconnected events, and that's why I thought that when I was writing this book that I would instead of just doing individual princes chapter by chapter, that I would match up princes with either another prince or a rival or a brother or in one particular case a wife, just to give you some sort of sense of the kind of life that was lived by these princes.
I love it. We've got so many princes involved in this book. It was so difficult.
But they're nearly all related as well.
Oh, it's so complicated. So I thought to myself, we need to pick at least two. So I asked you to pick two. Which ones are your favourite out of this? Because I couldn't pick. Something was always happening left, right, and centre. So for me, it was very difficult. And we've gone first with Ludovico Gonzaga. So let's start with the family. So who were they and where were they located?
Okay, so the Gonzaga family are the rulers of Mantua, which is a small, it exists, it's a town now, but it's a part of Italy. But in those days, it was an independent state, a very small independent state, quite wealthy because of the incredibly good agricultural land of the Po Valley. But it's a small state stuck in between two bigger ones, so Milan on one side and Venice on the other. And the key point of the survival of the Gonzagas depended on how they balanced getting on with these two neighbours who are quite often at war with each other. And the Gonzagas took over power in Mantua in 1328, and very much thanks to Ludovico and his political house, this tiny state survived and flourished right the way through the Renaissance. It's a really famous centre of Renaissance culture and well worth visiting, although it does have to be, it's not a major tourist centre, which is probably rather a nice thing about it, but it's a lovely little town. Not such a good thing, it's very hot, it's in the middle, it's built in, not exactly, on swamps, which in the Renaissance, of course, were fantastic hunting grounds. So they would go off after duck and various wildfowl. It was a sort of, one of the things that people enjoyed doing was hunting. And but it didn't make for a very healthy place. It was quite damp in the winter and extremely muggy in the summer.
I quite like that. I mean, this Ludovico's his wife is quite extraordinary, isn't she? Barbara.
Yes, she's Barbara von Hernzollen.
Thank you for helping.
And also called Barbara of Brandenburg, and she's an extraordinary person. She arrives. She's a German princess. She's the niece of the emperor, and she arrives in. She's betrothed to Ludovico. She's about 15 years younger than him. I can't remember exactly. And she arrives in Mantua at the age of 12, speaking no Italian at all. Imagine a 12-year-old speaking no Italian at all. She's allowed one or two of her old German members of her household come with her, but mostly she has an Italian household. She immediately goes to school with her to-be brothers and sisters-in-law, who are Ludovico's younger siblings, and they're all being taught by quite a famous humanist in a school that Ludovico's father set up in Mantua. And she straight away, she goes to school, and then a couple of years later, quite young, the marriage is consummated, and she produces 14 children for him.
Wow, 14.
Yeah, 1-4. That's quite a lot of children.
Wow, I'm thinking of this whole. She's kind of growing up in a way in the household with him.
Yeah, yes, and that's good because she really, really, when her husband becomes Marquis after the death of his father, she really knows where she is and she really knows what she's doing. You know, she really understands how Mantuan culture and all this kind of thing. So, you know, so that's impressive, and she's a very redoubtable character. I mean, what survives amazingly is quantities of letters. The Gonzaga archives in Mantua are just, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters written, and there are quite a lot of them from her to her husband and vice versa.
I'm going to ask, were they in love with each other? I know it's an odd question to ask, but do we know?
No, I don't. I'm not sure. He didn't really have mistresses. I think they were very, very close. I mean, for example, one of the letters says he's gone off. Ludovico goes off to do on business, to go to one of his other, you know, sort of palaces, and he for some reason he doesn't say anything to his dog, or doesn't take his dog with him. And Barbara writes to him and says, you know, you must have left this morning without saying goodbye to your dog. Because he's just been wandering around the palace, looking in every room, looking for you. There's something unbelievably domestic. The domestic detail implies a huge, huge affection. You couldn't, and also trust, which is another important point, because Ludovico earns his income as a mercenary soldier, so he's quite often away and fighting, and while he's away fighting, she is in charge of running the state.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, you've got to trust your wife. And there's one particular occasion when he was wounded, and it was very cold. And he sends a letter to his wife saying, "Please, could you send me some? I'm not very well. I've managed to get away, and I'm on my way home, but can you send me something to keep me warm, and also a cushion, because I've hurt my leg and it's really, really painful to ride." And it's sort of, I don't know, there's something that, yeah, the answer to your question is they loved each other. Whether it was a great passion, I don't think so. But on the other hand, it was a very successful partnership.
So moving on to another relationship that he has. So it would be with his father. How did that go?
Now, that wasn't good, and that was interesting because he was the eldest son, and he was his father's heir, but he was quite shy, quite gauche as a young man, very bookish, shy, quite serious. And his brother the younger brother that was next to him was completely different, you know, sporty, outgoing, jolly, you know, sort of brilliant jouster, and, you know, really good at all the sort of, you know, stuff that a Renaissance prince was supposed to be. And there's evidence that the father at one point changed his will and asked, you know, cut Ludovico out of the equation. And he did get it, and he did get it in the end. Although he did end up having to fight his younger brother, which can't have been very easy. But you know, because his father was a completely different character. But actually, Ludovico was a clever ruler. He wasn't a sort of, I mean, you see pictures of him, and he doesn't look. He's not swashbuckling, or, you know, he's not sort of big and he's slight and, you know, thin and just a nice man, but not what you'd call he doesn't look like a powerful soldier. And he obviously didn't get on that well with his father. He obviously preferred his books to riding around and doing jousting and hunting and that kind of thing. At
least his wife was on his side.
Exactly. And his wife was definitely on his side. And I mean, when he died, he left five sons and 3 grandsons. I mean, you know, But it's yes, I think it was a pity about his father. I think he was 30 something when his father died, so he did have quite a long time of being, well, not like Prince Charles, obviously, but he had quite a long time of hanging around.
So we've got the Sforzas now. I mean, we hear this name. I mean, I've heard this name even in Polish history. Where do they come into this whole part of the history?
Now that is interesting. Yes, this is an important point. This is one of the problems, in a sense, that Ludovico had to deal with, because in 1450, the Duke of Milan, the Visconti Duke of Milan, died, and the idea was that he didn't have a son, and so he had a daughter, an illegitimate daughter, and he persuaded the daughter was engaged to, and then by this stage married to, Francesco Sforza, who was a relatively, another very interesting character, completely sort of a fairly brutish soldier, completely uncultured, sort of thug really, and quite a vicious and aggressive soldier who endlessly fought. His particular enemy was the King of Naples. Anyway, in 1450, he besieged Milan and took over, basically forced his way into the city and declared himself Duke. But the emperor refused to recognize him. And Ludovico was faced with either did Ludovico go with the emperor, who was also his sovereign lord, and equally be aggressive towards Sforza, or did he make an ally of Francesco Sforza? And he decided to do the latter, which was quite a significant moment, because it meant that it just slightly changed the balance of power in northern Italy, because he was slightly more on the Milan side than on Venice's side. But anyway, but that was it. He managed as a politician. It was quite a successful move.
I was going to ask, what's the outcome of that?
Well, Sforza becomes Duke of Milan in name. I mean, strictly de facto Duke of Milan, despite the fact that he's never recognised. And then he has, a bit like Ludovico, he has a large quantity of sons, and one of whom inherits, one of whom dies. The eldest one dies, and his son inherits. But the uncle, so Francesco Sforza's son, decides that he wants the power. So he just says, "Right, sorry, I'm Duke, and you're not." To the nephew, who is rightfully Duke, and locks him up. And then humiliates him. It's sort of embarrassing. He's a bully, but from your point of view, the Polish point of view, the Francesco Sforza was very successful in marrying his daughters off into all the kind of royal ducal princely houses, including, interestingly, the King of Poland married one of the daughters. Another daughter married into the the main marriage that linked them was the marriage between the Sforza daughter and the heir to the King of Naples. Anyway, the point is, there came a point where Sforza was related by marriage to practically every royal house, including the French, but not the English.
That's very interesting. But I was going to ask, just to backtrack just a touch, you spoke about the relationship between him and his father and his wife, but what about his brother? I mean, from what I can assume, they did not get on because they were polar opposites.
Yes, exactly. And what happened was that during the battles between establishing the relationship, re-establishing the relationship between Mantua and Milan under the Sforzas and Venice, the brother decides to line up with Venice and tried to oust Ludovico from Mantua with the help of the Venetian army. So poor old Ludovico has to fight his brother, and he wins, but the brother shortly after that dies, but not in an unconnected manner. And there was never any suggestion of poison or anything like that. I think he died of ill health.
We need to, if we're talking about the Renaissance, we have to bring in Catholicism and the Pope. And he is going to make an appearance in the next Prince as well. But Pius II, he takes on a very, very important role in this part of history, doesn't he? Especially with Ludovico.
Yes, I think the important point about Pius II is that he is a pope who, with a mission to enhance the power of his own family, who are Sienese, not particularly grand. And so he makes allies, particular allies with various different people, and for various different reasons, some of which are to do with this dynastic ambitions. But for Ludovico, I'm getting this the wrong way around. What Pius II is trying to do is to enhance his own family's dynastic chances, if you like. And the other thing he's trying to do, which I know is your next question, is to counter the Turkish threat, and so he calls a crusade. And what Ludovico Gonzaga does, which is quite clever, is he offers to host the Congress that Pius II wants to hold, because he wants it to come for the whole of Christendom. He wants so Northern Europe to come to this Congress. So representatives from France, England, and Poland, and particularly the Empire. And Ludovico uses the excuse of the link between his wife and the Emperor to say that it's a big good thing to have it in Mantua, and also Mantua is that much closer, obviously, significantly closer to the Empire than Rome is. But what the important point? That's why. Pius II has an important role to play with the Gonzagas, because he brings the whole papal court to Mantua. But as I say, Pius II has two items on his agenda. So he is the first, I suppose, of what we call the Nepotist Popes. The Renaissance popes were notorious for enhancing their families, and quite a lot of the book is, every single chapter in the book is about one pope or another trying to get his family into power, and other people out of power. So it's worth remembering at this point that the papacy has only just come back to Italy after 100 and something years, when it was resident in France. In Avignon, there's a big papal. That's where the papal palace in Avignon became so important, and it's an important development from Pius II onwards, that increasingly cardinals were Italian, and there's only been two non-Italian popes after Pius II. So the first one was at the beginning of the 16th century, and the second one was John Paul II, which is that's a big stretch. Every pope otherwise has been Italian.
I only just realised that. John Paul II. Wow.
Yeah.
Poland got in there. Sorry, just
no, I didn't. I should have said. I should have specified. No, but it's really. It's quite. There aren't many things that you can say, but how that is centuries of Italians dominating the papacy, and obviously, and they still do.
I'm really actually looking forward to discussing the next Prince, only because these popes are just they're absolutely mad. These popes, aren't they?
Yes. Well, if you forget that they don't behave like you want them to behave as spiritual leaders of the Christian world. What they behave much more like petty kings. I mean, sort of that's their behaviour is much more secular than spiritual.
Okay.
And of course, they were powerful. I mean, if you had the Pope on your side, then there was an awful lot you could do. And if you didn't have the Pope on your side, you were a bit, stuck. Or as in Henry VIII's case, you just said, well, sorry, go away, rather less politely.
So my quick question before we jump into the church coming back into the story again, is the Turkish threat sort of subsided? Do they get rid of the Turkish threat?
No. The important point about the Turkish threat is it's the Ottomans establish their sort of power base in the Middle East, and in 1453 they conquer Constantinople, which is Christian at that stage, was a Christian city, and it's a very, very important trading post because it's because of its position between East and West, and in fact trade continues, and that isn't really a problem. But the Ottomans first spread all the way across North Africa, and then into the Middle East, and then up through the Balkans into the and right up to Vienna. I mean, they take Budapest, but the Turkish threat is a threat until the 17th century, 18th century. Always on the eastern borders of Christian Europe.
I'm going to throw in a Polish thing here, only because I can. I'm not very.
No, you should.
Only because I'm not very good at this part of Polish history, obviously being a 20th century historian. But when you said Vienna, all I can think of is Jan Sobieski battling.
Yes. No, exactly. No, and the Turks do. I mean, the Poles do have quite a significant role to play. I mean, the Poles are definitely, a significant power in Europe, in Renaissance Europe. There are wonderful descriptions of Polish embassies coming to Rome, and they, the Romans are absolutely amazed by the clothes that the Polish nobles wear, and also the furs that they could bring, beaver fur and things like that, which you just simply couldn't get in Italy.
Oh my gosh.
So really kind of, it was a really important place, and also it was a strong. Poland was a stronghold even in the 16th century, a Catholic stronghold.
Do you know what? We should definitely do a podcast, I think, discussing how the Italians perceive the Poles in the Renaissance. I think that would be an excellent podcast to go on to the pole position, I think.
Okay.
Let's do it. But right, let's go. We're going back to Renaissance Italy, not Renaissance Poland. So the church is then involved. I mean, again, the church does not stop getting involved at this point, does it?
No. And it as I say, it just gets increasingly secular. I mean, one of the significant points that happens with Ludovico Gonzaga is that as a reward for hosting the Congress of Mantua, Ludovico's second son is made a cardinal, aged 14, far too young, and establishes a pattern whereby the ruling princely houses of Italy get a cardinal and therefore get a say in the choice of who is made pope, and also in defining church policy, and that is a very significant impact. Pius II takes the first steps, but again, is this the church as a secular power, not as a spiritual figurehead?
We're rushing through a little bit about Ludovico, and the reason behind this is that there is so much more information, and I want you to go out and buy Mary's book rather than we do everything on a plate here. So do bear with us. So we're now going to talk about Ludovico when he dies. I mean, he dies. What kind of legacy does he leave behind then?
Well, his legacy is quite staggering, because actually the one thing that we haven't talked about is the one of the things, the other thing that the Congress of Mantua did was a lot of the foreigners particularly the Roman cardinals who came to Mantua, could not believe how uncomfortable it was. You know, it was a filthy place, and it wasn't even paved. The roads weren't paved, and the accommodation was very, very limited. And they complained about it, or they were quite rude about it. And as a result, Ludovico decided and was helped by a famous architect who was actually a member of the papal court, but not as an architect, as an abbreviator, letter writer. He and Leon Battista Alberti, for anybody who's interested. The important point is that Ludovico gets him to design new churches and completely does up, you know, over the following 20 years before he dies, does up Mantua in a very impressive way. And so alongside the stable succession with, you know, hundreds of sons and the sons and the grandsons, he also leaves behind a legacy of art and architecture, which is completely unparalleled. Things like, for example, not only Alberti's churches, but he also employed Andrea Mantegna, as a painter. And we have, for various historical reasons, not entirely healthy. No, yeah, basically, in the Queen's collection is Mantegna's most famous series of paintings called The Triumphs of Caesar, which are these huge, great canvases which decorated a big hall in one of the palaces, and just depicts the triumph of Julius Caesar entering Rome. So they're just chariots with piled high with booty and slaves and musicians but they're on display at Hampton Court. They're really very, very spectacular canvases. So he left. So his legacy is stable succession and a quite seriously sensible political background, and also this artistic, cultural succession legacy, which is quite critical. All his sons, his grandsons, his great grandsons, great grandsons, and all contribute. Then following in the 16th century, it was I very nearly chose Ludovico's great grandson Federico, who's the first Duke of Mantua, who is the most staggering. He was a patron of Titian, and just an amazing artistic legacy again. And that's why it's such an amazing place to visit. There's so much really beautiful stuff to see.
So our next prince is actually related to Ludovico, isn't he?
Yes, in a typical sort of round the world. So Ipolito's aunt is somebody called Isabella d'Este, who is in her own right very famous as a patron. And Isabella was Ludovico's granddaughter, married to Ludovico's grandson. And they're distant. There are other sort of relations. The two families are very similar. They both have the Ferrara's not very far away from Mantua, and it's also it's a bigger state, Ferrara, but it's not one of the big states. And the families intermarried in the Middle Ages as well, so they have blood together, if you know what I mean.
And well, we're now going to start talking about popes. I'm really looking forward.
We're back talking about popes.
This one is all about popes and all about the Catholic religion. So first of all, how did Ipolito get involved in the church?
He's the second son of the Duke of Ferrara. And as second son, he was automatically destined for a career in the church. And he was massively helped by the fact that his uncle, who is also called Ipolito d'Este, was also a cardinal. So he had a sort of leg up to start with. And he got made Archbishop of Milan at the age of 9. Now, Milan is a big see. It was an important then still is an important and large see. And to have a 9-year-old boy as Archbishop, that says quite a lot about
it's just
the state of the church at the time. Well, the interesting point about these about Ipolito is that when he's made a cardinal in the 1538, that is the big absolutely the sort of in the Renaissance, high Renaissance, and by the time he dies in 1572, the Protestantism has decimated the church in Europe. I mean, Europe is now split by 1572. Europe is completely split, half Catholic, half Protestant. England has left the church completely, and so his career is really fascinating because it completely covers the whole of the whole issue of church reform. I mean, I work on his papers. That's what I do most of my proper research on. And he left behind 2,000 letters, 200 account books. I mean, I can talk. Well, I'm not, don't necessarily know an enormous amount about it. But you can learn. I mean, anything: clothes, horses, the price of candles, butter, sewage. Medicine, breeding. You ask, and you ask, and you can. It's really fascinating material. Anyway, so I know I know much more about him at a domestic level. And he was. The answer to your question is short and sweet. Is he was born into it, and I should actually say, by the way, which is slightly. Which is an important point about Ipolito, is that his mother was Lucretia Borgia, so his grandfather was Pope Alexander VI.
So in theory, he should become Pope. In theory,
well, I don't think they did fail to make the papacy hereditary. Although they definitely, the Farnese family definitely tried, and the Medici, there were 2 Medici popes. But no, I think Ipolito wanted to be a pope, but I'm sure you'll explain. I'll explain. You're going to ask me later. I will explain later why. Anyway, so
we've got. You just mentioned the Medici, so the family has come into the story as well. So first of all,
inevitably.
Yeah, so who was Cosimo Medici, and why do him and Ipolito clash? Because there is a major clash, isn't there, between them?
Yes, major clash. I mean, they're 2 different families, okay, 2 different princely families, and 1274 they took over power. They became the rulers of Ferrara in 1274. The Medici became rulers. Became princes in 1536. Cosimo inherited in 1536, so 1532. So 5 centuries. 3 centuries. Anyway, my maths isn't very good. But the point is that the Ipolito comes from an old family, well-established princely family. Cosimo comes from a very, very, very new family who've only recently been raised to the nobility, and his ancestors are bankers, and that's they were also wealthy, but they did not have a title. And the reason why there was no particular reason why they should clash, except that Cosimo, who was the most appalling, arrogant sort of man, was absolutely determined to be the most important, to be the leading noble in Italy, and he wanted to be titled King of Tuscany. And therefore take precedence over all the other princely houses. And he started his campaign, by persuading his, writing to his ambassador in France, saying, you've got to make sure, we should take precedence over the ambassadors of Ferrara, because Florence is an older place than Ferrara, which is true, but it's not. Sorry, it's not the place; it's the house. That's what the Este say. Anyway, Cosimo conducts, and I should just. This is where we get back to the church. Cosimo needs a pope who will do this. He needs a pope to appoint him, if you like, officially appoint him King of Tuscany. And the two men clash because Cosimo deliberately picks a quarrel with the Este family, and then they then further clash over who should be made pope. So does that make any sense?
No, do you know what? It is so quarrelsome. This person, they want this and they want that, but they need this person to do it. So let's start a quarrel. It's just a mess at this time, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it's not helped by various the different popes that get elected. I mean, over the period of Ipolito and Cosimo's clash. So the Pope that's elected in 1555 is Paul IV, who is as he's a very aggressive reformist Pope, but he's not prepared to have he's a complete autocrat. He's not prepared to have a council to reform the church, which is what people are demanding by this stage. He thinks he's going to reform it himself, and so he sets up the Inquisition and gives the Inquisition the power. Sorry, he doesn't set it up. He gives it's already set up, and he gives the Inquisition the power to conduct a campaign against heresy. And heresy basically it was people reporting their own, their enemies for not eating. People got into trouble for not eating meat. Sorry, for eating meat on Fridays, and I don't think you could quite get executed for that. But the things that you could get executed for were there was an awful lot. Anyway, it was a very unpleasant time. And Ipolito, in fact, is probably quite lucky because during the conclave that at which Paul IV was elected, Cosimo tries to buy votes. His patrons are the kings of France, so he's bishop and or archbishop of an awful lot of very important sees in France, and he is the French candidate for election. There's it's quite difficult to explain this succinctly, but basically France and Spain. And by Spain, sorry, Habsburg, Spain, and so the Habsburgs rule Spain and the Empire, and the Valois rule France, and their enmity is completely dictates 16th century European history. Paul IV hates the Spanish with a kind of deadly loathing, and therefore hates Cosimo because Cosimo has married the daughter of the Spanish viceroy in Naples. And Ipolito, he doesn't like Ipolito either because he accuses Ipolito of simony, of trying to buy votes in the conclave, which was unquestionably true. Henry, there's a letter saying, he's in his own hand writing to his brother saying, and I've got promises of, 50,000, ducats or something from the King of France, and what with the money that you're going to give me as well, I should have a very good chance of election. You sit there going, what? But in fact, he didn't get elected. And the new Pope, Paul IV, accused him of simony, and which of course he was guilty of, and exiled him to Ferrara. So he had to pack all his stuff up from Rome and get moved to Ferrara for 4 years until, wait till the Pope died. And in the meantime, quite a lot of his colleagues were sent, some of them were caught up with the Inquisition, several were imprisoned. some, various bishops and things were executed for having affairs, and there were, anybody. One of the cardinals was put in prison because his brother was fighting for the King of Spain.
Wow.
Anyway.
It's hardcore.
So actually, Ipolito was quite lucky that he wasn't in Rome. So so that's lucky.
Completely lucked out, didn't he? At that point.
Yeah. No, he couldn't. He just wasn't. He was just out of living up in Ferrara, doing a bit of fishing, going hunting, and eating a lot, and he couldn't even. The worst thing, he had to start selling his silver because he was running out of money because, of course, he got no income whatsoever from his French benefices because he was put into exile. Anyway, then the Pope died suddenly, and Ipolito came straight. Literally got the news arrived on Saturday, and by Monday, the whole Ipolito and his household were back on the road, going, riding down to Rome with all their goods and things.
And he does. He tries for the papacy again, doesn't he? Then.
Yeah, no, he tries every time, and this is 1559. This particular conclave that after the death of Paul IV, which is the subject of the book, the Conclave, which went on for 3.5 months, and absolutely, they were just people were dying. They had to fumigate the Sistine Chapel because the smell was so appalling. But it was a bedroom. It was a dormitory for 20-something cardinals. Just the stench must have been absolutely appalling. And Ipolito can't get it. He's realised he's not once he knows he isn't going to be elected, and that's partly because two of the cardinals that supported him die, and one is ill and has to leave. So he opts out of the picture, and but then the question is, he needs to elect somebody who he will, who he can, who's going to help his career. And oddly, this is the only occasion where Ipolito and Cosimo end up on the same side. And the deal that they do, Cosimo is prepared to do anything, include lying, which he does. He gets the vote of several cardinals by telling one of them that their family, who've been removed from office, I think is the only, in a rather dramatic way, for various unspeakable crimes, not least murder. And the guy who's accused of murder, it's his brother, is a cardinal, and Cosimo promises him that he'll be absolutely fine and not to worry, and he'll get his duchy back. And he says that he's got the new Pope's promise that this will happen, and of course the new Pope hadn't done anything of the sort, and tries the cardinal and the brother and executes them both, serves them right. But anyway, but equally, from Cosimo's point of view, the new Pope, so Paul IV, is succeeded by Pius IV. Pius IV refuses point blank to give Cosimo his title of king. But Ipolito is massively in favour, and spends quite a lot of time in France, involved with the French wars of religion there. But anyway, so that's a bit unfortunate it was a bit unfortunate for Cosimo. But so it meant that the following conclave, Cosimo was absolutely determined we would do anything, whatever it took, to make sure that the person he elected, ensured the person that he elected or arranged to have elected will grant his wishes.
He doesn't win the next one, does he? At all?
No. He never becomes Pope. But I think the thing about becoming, it's not quite. When you say win, the interesting thing is we always think of it as like sort of winning a medal or something. The really key thing about conclave was not getting you're elected yourself. I mean, obviously that would be amazing, but the really important thing was to make sure that you were on the winning side, so that the person who was elected owed their election to you, because that would mean that they would that would give you, there would be favours to be granted. You would get the press. You gave the jobs to, when you were elected Pope, you gave the jobs to the people who supported you. You didn't hand them out randomly to people who loathed you. But so there's a whole sort of second level, if you like. It's not just individual wins. It's more factional. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you had to align yourself with the right people to get what you want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how you did success in Rome, in any conceit, in all sort of walks of life. Shopkeepers, jewelers, moneylenders, architects. Whatever you had to. If you could spot a rising star, and you get it right, your fortune's made, because you rise with them.
So he dies then in 1572 without obviously becoming Pope, which is what he wanted, but he didn't get. What happens then to the Desto family?
No, that is interesting, because by this stage, Ipolito's brother dies in 1559 during the conclave, and his son, so Ipolito's nephew, becomes Duke, and marries several times and fails to have any children. And as part of the deal between the second Pius IV's successor and Cosimo, various sort of edicts against the Este family are passed. One of which is that that papal fiefs cannot be inherited by illegitimate sons and or illegitimate children. Men. What I mean is, I don't mean it can be a cousin or something like that. It doesn't have to be. It does have to be male. But the point is that Ferrara was a papal fief, as opposed to Mantua, which was a imperial fief, and it meant that when this nephew, Ippolito's nephew, Ippolito couldn't stop this legislation going through, and when it became clear that his nephew was never going to have any children, and it seems that he had some sort of, I suppose you might call it structural or physical abnormality. It's not entirely clear what was wrong with him, but he couldn't have children. I mean, he couldn't sire children, and and so when he dies in the nephew dies in 1598, the Pope seizes Ferrara and takes it back from the Este family. So the poor old Este family are relegated to being Dukes of Modena, as opposed to Dukes of Ferrara and Modena. And but I mean, that of course is, that's one of the reasons, as it happens, that's, for us historians, it's truly fantastic, because the reason that all these Ippolito's papers and the papers of all his relations have survived is because they were just all stuffed into a palace in Modena and just left, and nobody interfered with them. I mean, Modena's famous now because it's it's where Ferrari operate from, very near Modena, but it's and there's balsamic vinegar as well. This is another beautiful little place, but it was off the beaten track. Nobody sacked it during the Second World War. Nobody sacked it during the First World War. It's basically all this stuff has survived because it was just, anyway. So it happens, it has its advantages, but it was very unfortunate for the Este family that Ippolito couldn't, I mean, the old age is nothing you can do, but Ippolito's nephew, the Duke, his younger brother was also a cardinal, and they also failed to persuade the successive popes to change the legislation.
Mary, that was in so much detail, and I love it. I'm sold. You're the first person to sell me on the Renaissance. Um, before
And I
we,
haven't even told you, you haven't even heard the best bit, which is that you just have to hear briefly that Cosimo got ensured that Pius V was elected, and who was an important church reformer, and he literally did everything, arse licked well, and truly, and of course he wasn't made King of Tuscany, but he was made Grand Duke of Tuscany and took precedence over all the other Italian princes, and which is appalling. But anyway, that's the way these things happen.
he didn't get his comeuppance, basically.
No, he did. Well, the Medici got their comeuppance. I mean, if he would have been furious with his, great grandsons, Cosimo. I mean, he was succeeded by his two sons, and then several, the offspring of the second son, and they just got more utterly appallingly decadent as the dynasty went on, and just sort of collapsed in sort of the last Grand Duke was a complete drunkard who used to throw up out of the window of his carriage all over the roads as he was driven through the city. Ugh.
Mary, you need to come back, and we can talk more about this. But can you remind our listeners before we finish the name of your book and where they can get it?
You can buy it on Amazon, or you can check my website, which is mary-hollingsworth.com, and it's called The Princes of the Renaissance.
Can people get it in their local bookstores?
They will be able to by the end of February. Sorry. Fantastic. And the cover picture is Ludovico Gonzaga sitting on his chair, talking to his throne, talking to his secretary, and under the chair is the dog.
Amazing, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Join us tomorrow. We were thrilled to have with us Fred Logval of Harvard to talk all about the first in his two-part biography of JFK. So tomorrow we cover JFK up to 1956. So that's his privileged upbringing, the beginnings of a political career, and World War II. So don't miss out on that one. And then, because it's Valentine's Day and because Beth nagged me, we will be debating down the pub history's most romantic act. There were only two people in the room, maybe three if Alina can be bothered, Charlie, Beth and Alina, who will want to do this. Everyone else is a cynic and will gag, so it'll be interesting to see what stories people come up with. Don't miss out on that one. Don't forget that we do exist on Patreon as History Hack and on Patreon as well, which is Podbean's own version. Alina and I have had massive fun doing this in 2020, but life's going to change quite a lot next year and we're going to actually have to go and earn a living, etc. If we want to keep up the regularity that we've been bringing you and the kind of guests that we've been bringing you and the workload, then we will need your help. So if you join, there's going to be incentives for joining on either of those platforms. We're revamping ourselves on both of them. So don't forget to go in. You can do as little as $1 a month, and it all goes towards keeping up History Hack as regular as we've been able to bring it to you this year. We are now on YouTube. We are posting all of our new episodes on there, and we have our own channel, and we are gradually posting all of the back episodes because we have been made aware of the fact that you can only find the last 100 on some platforms. So you can go and listen to your heart's content and laugh at the cartoons and have a great time. So do go over there and subscribe.